Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today on this video, let's talk about crankbait fishing during September and also, moving into October as well. Really my crankbait fishing starts picking up in like late April is when I first start catching some of those deep diving crankbait fish. May and June are the hottest months of the year as far as I'm concerned. For fishing a crankbait out deep. Of course, square bill fishing a 1.5 or something like that up shallow, especially around rock, riprap, that sort of thing, can play all year round. But when I'm fishing a plug that goes deeper than like 6 feet, May and June for those extra deep divers is kind of the time period that I'm really going to start winging these around to get reaction bites. However, as summer progresses and more fish have seen a bait like this right here, this is the Strike King 6XD. This bait right here is going to kind of lose favor just because of the fact that there's just so much pressure. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't catch them on a bait like this, a 6XD or a 5XD, Series 5, whatever you're talking about, whatever your favorite deep diving crankbait is. I'm talking about these because I love the Strike King deep divers. They're not necessarily the best right out of the package as far as tracking straight, but I catch a ton of fish on them, and once you get them tuned, I mean, they're just killers out there. But anyways, May and June, really good. Once you get into July and August, man, you have to start finessing these fish because just everybody has thrown 1,000 of these different crankbaits on those fish. But once you start getting into September, that is another window of opportunity for crankbait fishing. But I end up transitioning from those big plugs to these small, what I call finesse crankbaits. Okay, so this right here is a Bandit 200 series, probably my favorite, what I call a finesse crankbait. Very small. You look at it as far as a size comparison to the 6XD or even the 5XD, very small profile, just kind of bite-sized, really imitates small bait fish really well. But I start to see a lot of action on this bait and similar baits that dive, that 6 to 8 foot zone. That's really what you're looking at with 10 pound test. 10 pound test is a really good line size for this bait, and you can get it down to 8 feet if you really kind of stick your rod tip down. But anyways, it's a really killer bait. And I think one of the reasons why this bait starts playing in September and October is actually twofold. Number one, fish have been seeing those big deep diving crankbaits all summer long. And when you end up throwing a smaller crankbait like this, smaller profile bait, I think that it just naturally will get more bites because it's something a little bit different. The second thing that happens, especially out here on like TVA fisheries, like Lake Chickamauga, and like Nick Jack or even Watts Bar or Fort Loudon, Tellico, is that you start to see a lot of small shad move into the backs of creeks. Now, that transition, where the shad start making their way into the backs of those creeks that have a little bit of fresh water flushing into them, you have to get really specific as far as the size and profile and color of the baits, because the fish that follow those shad into the backs of the creeks, they're so hyper focused on that specific size class of shad and the look of them that if you throw anything that's any size bigger, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of bites. In fact, on Lake Chickamauga, that gets a ton of pressure, once those fish move into the backs of the creeks, if you're not like exact as far as matching the hatch, you might not even get a bite, and you might have fish crashing around you, all kinds. That is a scenario that happens every single year. Is once the shad make it into the backs of the creeks, those bass, even though they're everywhere and crushing those shad, they get very, very hard to catch. So you have to downsize. And that happens across the country. It's not just TVA fisheries that happens. That fall transition where the shad start going in the backs of the creeks happen everywhere that have shad. Now, September is pretty early still for that transition. You really need to start having those colder nights, and where you have to put a sweatshirt on for those shad to start making their way in the backs. Now, one thing that can really hasten or increase that movement, that transition, or fast forward it, if you will, is a little bit of cold rain. Like if you get a storm and it's like colder rain than the ambient water in the lake, then a lot of shad will start making that migration. That'll kind of jumpstart that migration into the backs of the creeks, and a bait like this can be really good. Now, one of the things that I look for when I'm throwing a bait like this, because once I get into the flats in the backs of the creeks, I'm probably going to be throwing something like a small swim bait, maybe a tiny little tiny little chatterbait, like the Micro Max chatterbait or the Mini Max chatterbait. Any of those will work good when you get on the flats, but September and early October, though, most of the fish are going to be kind of positioning themselves on the last steep bank. So like a creek channel bend that bumps up right against the bank where it's a little bit steeper, you got that deep water access, and usually you got some good rock there. That's where a lot of fish are going to hang out before they move on to the flat into the really shallow water, and they'll stay in the shallow water until, mid-November a lot of times. And so that scenario, those steeper banks, the last steep bank going into the back of a creek, that's when I like to throw one of these, Bandit 200s or Finesse crankbaits. A DT6 is another really good example. There's a lot of different crankbaits on the market that kind of fit this description. Small crankbait, dives about 6 to 8 foot. Some of them go down to 10, but they're just really, really good at imitating those small bait fish. So anyways, that is just one of my favorite baits, that I can cover a lot of water with, get some good reaction strikes, and then maybe I need to slow down with something else. Whether I'm pitching a jig to like shoreline cover, laydowns and things like that, or throwing a swim bait around, swim jig, whatever it may be, I can slow down after throwing the crankbait a little bit. So, but as far as the tackle for this, I'm going to be using, the 6.6 gear ratio, a VLD10 reel. I really like to have kind of a lighter action rod. So I use not a light action rod, but lighter than like a medium heavy or something like that. So I use a medium 7.3 Versa series rod. That seems to be like the perfect rod for these baits. It's very responsive, so I can get a good solid hook set, but it's also light enough that it casts these baits very, very well. That's one of the challenges with a small Finesse crankbait is just the casting distance, just getting enough weight. But anyways, that's the tackle I'd use, and I usually use like 10 or 12 pound at most in Vizex. That is the line that I like to use. And yeah, that is how I fish. Those small Finesse crankbaits, they are a great way to catch a lot of fish during the fall. I've made a good deal of money in fall tournaments or late summer tournaments with those small crankbaits. So if you're looking for something to get reaction strikes from those fish that are starting to transition into the backs of the creeks, give a Finesse crankbait like the Bandit 200 a try. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. If you have any questions, drop a comment below, and make sure you trust the process. I'm going to see you out on the water.